Hi.
Afternoon. Just one, please.
Okay, one. I could take you out. You could join the tour that's in progress if you want to go outside.
Sure.
Could you take him out to meet Fred Phillips?
Sure. Hi there. Hi. Where's right there. I guess get ready to go. Okay, great. Thank you.
Quick timing.
This is the first engine on the tour. It's a GP7. Went into service in 1953. 1953, it would have been directly replacing a steam engine. Let's go up there. The big handle is the train brake. The smaller handle is the engine brake. And this gold handle over here, that's the throttle.
Okay.
Now, unlike the gas pedal on your car, the throttle has 8 distinct notches. You know, you just crank it up. That handle is forward, reverse, and neutral. The handle over there is the dynamic brake. The dynamic brake does is it basically reverses the process. It takes, you know, it turns the motor into a generator basically. So instead of the motor making the train move, the motion of the train powers the generator. It's converted into electric energy, and the electric energy comes up to that bulge on the roof right there. Okay, inside that is a resistor grid. On a lot of railroads it was set up so that an engine going down the hill could actually generate power and transmit, help an engine coming up the hill.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
With Teslas right now, you know, regenerative braking all of a sudden is a big deal for cars.
So it's been around a while.
Railroads have been doing that for over a century. This first generation, 1953. This is second generation. You know, here they figured out, you know, you put the front in the front. give you better vision. So let's go take a look at that guy. This is the first locomotive that we restored. That is this locomotive when we were finished fixing it up. That's like 1983. That's the Reading shops down in Reading. Okay. You know, at that point, obviously a beautiful paint job, everything was, you know, in really good shape. We leased that to the Reading and Northern, and they ran it in actual train service. Here you can see it switching coal cars. This is the new St. Nicholas breaker up by Minersville. They blew the turbocharger on it, so it sat here for a number of years, and you can, you know, look at the previous picture and look at this and see, you know, just how bad it got. Eventually we got around, we fixed the turbocharger last summer, but we found a few other things wrong. Every spring I tell people it should be ready to run by the end of the year, and I repeat that every year. Interesting about this was the first production GP30. An electromotive division of General Motors made more than 800 of these locomotives, and this was the first. But the trucks underneath it and some of the internals are actually trade-in from the Reading FT units. The FT units went into service in 1945, and you look, you know, 3 have typical roller bearings, but the 4th have the original journal box. And you look at that lid, it doesn't say EMD, it says EMC. Back in 1945, the Electromotive Corporation was still an independent company, and it's kind of appropriate today because even though it's still known as EMD, it's now owned by Caterpillar.
Wow.
So.
Never knew that.
Even I know what Caterpillar is.
This locomotive, an FP7, this went into service in 1950. This is the locomotive that replaced the streamlined Crusader steam engines. There's 3 of these that survived. This is one of them. This is a photograph of this particular locomotive just up the road here in the station. There were 3 of these locomotives. This is our other locomotive, the one behind it's owned by National Railway Historical Society. These were up at Steamtown, and they ran their excursions for a couple of years with these. They broke something. They thought we should fix it. We thought they should fix it. So of course nobody fixed it. It sat up there for a number of years. Last summer it finally was leased by a tourist railroad in southern New Jersey, and they are, that's here, that's what it looks like today. They got it running, spruced it up, and they're running, you know, trains with that. Now the reason these 3 locomotives existed is the commuter lines out of Philadelphia are almost all electrified, but some of the longer runs had trains. And what they had was an engine at each end, and they had a cable that connected them, so when it get out to the end of the line at Phoenixville, the engineer would just walk back to the other end and, you know, drive it back. It was called a push-pull. And then the third engine was a backup because you were always working on one of the locomotives, so it did that. So this engine has been painted for Reading, and it was painted for Conrail, and it was painted for SEPTA, and then it was painted back for Reading for the museum, and so it goes. Now, an interesting thing about these 3 locomotives is they all have the same engine. It's called a 567. Now, you know, in a car, if you have a 327 Chevy, that means the engine block, the pistons displace 327 cubic inches for the engine block. 567 is the cubic inch displacement of a cylinder, and there are 16 cylinders. So between first and second generation, this is third generation. Boy, welcome cloud.
Yeah.
You know, we start 1,500 horsepower, 2250. This is 3,000 horsepower.
Wow.
You have that 700-gallon fuel tank. You have that 1,700-gallon fuel tank. This thing is 4,000 gallons.
Wow.
Appreciate the size of that thing. Oh, no, I will get to that. With 3 axles, it gets a little more complicated, as you can see looking at the other one. And this takes it to a whole nother phase. This improves the ride, but it also improves the factor of adhesion. You know, by keeping the weight on things the same, you're less likely to slip a wheel. Because of the suspension system, this engine can actually start a heavier train than the same engine without the special suspension. Now, you look over that third pile and you can see a switch engine. That's an NW2, 1,000 horsepower. That's fully operational. This is fully operational. Obviously can't go very far. We do fire it up a couple times a year. The interesting thing about the ALCOs is they don't have starter motors. They start up on compressed air. And they make noises you wouldn't believe. And ALCOs are known as honorary steam engines because they put out so much smoke. And to see one of these starting up, I mean, if you picture an elephant with a gas problem that's on fire. You know? You know, this is the smallest shadows you get all year.
Yeah.
It was yesterday, but actually it was closer to now than it was this time yesterday. The red locomotive is the second generation ALCO. It's 2,400 horsepower. The GP30 was 2,250. That's all they could get out of supercharging it. So this was kind of king of the hill for a while. It wasn't until EMD came out with the GP35 that they were able to claim them at the maximum horsepower. Behind this, which you'll see in a minute, is the first generation ALCO. It's an RS3. This is the RS3. That's the first generation version. Oh, sitting here. You can see the major brake components. And, you know, you get compressed air from a compressor in the engine. That comes out here, goes into a cylinder that drives a piston that moves this lever, which is connected by a bunch of rods and basically, you know, drams the brake shoe up against the wheel. Now, the thing about air brakes is if you turn off the air compressor, the air will eventually bleed out. So what you have is, you can think of it as a parking brake, or you can think of it as a backup brake operation. But you pull that handle, that pulls this chain, which pulls this, which locks it in place. Now, every car in the train has all of these components, you know, except for the compressor, of course. And, you know, that's how it works. Now, I mentioned that, you know, they bought all their electrical gear from GE, and you can see how it is. But this is basically a speedometer cable, but you notice it's on all 4 axles, which is a bit redundant. What this is a wheel slip detector. You know, if one wheel is going faster than the other, that wheel is spinning. So what they do is they blow sand between the wheel and the rail so that it holds on tighter, and that's how that works. Okay. On the outside, it's the passenger car. On the inside, it's called a locomotive engineering mobile training unit. When they're getting dieselized, they had to retrain their engineers, and they figured it'd be cheaper if they put the classroom to the students. So they set this up with complete control system, including the downstream contactors and some of the logic stuff. And they have that for both first and second generation diesels. Really a unique asset. This is Oley, which is kind of the southern part of Reading. This is Rutherford, which is basically the Harrisburg Yard. And, you know, we talked about that inside, but what's interesting here are these 2 panels control the hump yard at Harrisburg. And what's interesting, you look at it, and the eastbound is twice the size, or more than twice the size of the westbound.
Yeah.
Now, if you think about it, you know, the number of cars going west has to equal the number of cars going east, otherwise all the cars would wind up in California. So what's going on here? Okay, well, the answer is, you know, that the Reading competed with the Pennsy. Now, the Pennsy goes from New York to Chicago or to St. Louis directly on all their track. The Reading goes from Jersey City to west of Harrisburg. You know, on the east they hook up with the Central Railroad, New Jersey. In between they hook up with the B&O, and out west, west of Harrisburg, they meet up with the Western Maryland. Now, the thing is, if a train is coming east, the cars in that train can be going anywhere east of Harrisburg. You know, you can have cars going to Philly, you can have cars going to New York, you can have cars going to Scranton, have cars going to New England, you can have cars going to Maryland, you know, they can be going anywhere. So there's a whole bunch of choices of which train they go in depending on where they're going to. Cars going west, you know, they're going to Western Maryland. Now with a hump yard, you have a long grade that comes up, and then you have a very steep slope. So, you know, a train pushes his car up, car gets here, he looks at the number, figures out where it's going, he lines it up so that it's going out to that track. He gives the guy the signal, he pushes it, it goes down that hill and starts coasting into that track. Now, sometimes that track is empty and you want it to go fairly far. Other times the track may be filled, you don't want to go very far. Plus, depending on the car, you know, whether it's heavy or light, or whether it's, you know, got good lubrication or whatever, you know, you don't want to go in too fast so it crashes into the car. You know, you've seen all these signs, do not hump. That's what they're about. So these things are brakes. So when a car starts down, he can put on the brakes, and what that does is, you know, as the wheel goes by, it clamps the wheel, you know, not on the end, but on the sides, and squeezes it and slows it down so it doesn't crash into anything or hurt anything. So that's the story of a hump yard. Well, you can see, you know, there's the yard from Right. Okay. So, you know, you have that many, you have separate eastbound and westbound yards, and, you know, you can put a whole bunch of cars in there. See, the thing is now that you have, you know, Conrail and Norfolk Southern, all the railroads are like Norfolk West, Norfolk Southern. You know, it's just one, or like the Pennsy used to be. It's most efficient. Oh.
LTWT is the weight of the car. Is this the way of the car?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
you know, this is what it's empty like, and then loaded
Load limit.
You know, it'll carry 182,000 pounds, and you know, really, every car gets weighed, and you are charged by the ton miles.
Oh yeah.
So that's a Baldwin diesel. Baldwin was the largest steam locomotive manufacturer in the U.S. You know, they had a reputation. Their diesels were incredibly powerful pullers. They used to say that, you know, they can pull every car out of the yard along with the yard office. But out on the main line, they were a little squirrely. And this came to us, I mean, it's an ex-Reading locomotive, but it came to us from a steel mill down in Wilmington. And it's painted orange because the engineer walked alongside of it. He was controlling it by radio, and he walked alongside of it because what he was carrying they're called bottle cars, but they're like tank cars that are carrying molten iron, okay, or molten steel. And you don't want it sloshing around, so you never go very fast, and you're very careful hooking up. You know, with the problems of the Baldwin, and since they weren't going very far or very fast, they moved the radiator up on the roof, made it much larger and more efficient, and it really worked pretty well. You can also see how this car was converted from a passenger car into a baggage car. You know, toward the end, you know, as the automobiles got going, weren't that many passengers, but there was still a lot of mail, and Railway Express was the UPS of the day. Okay, this engine came to us from Stockton, California. Ex-Reading. You know, it kind of looked like this when it was under Reading. It's, you know, like 1,000 horsepower, but you notice it has ditch lights, it doesn't have the steps in the front, it's got, you know, a whole bunch of, you know, it's just been updated continuously until like last year, and it finally got to the point where they could no longer meet California smog requirements. And I'm not sure the exact details, but it's basically like California gave them a little money if they'd retire the engine and disable it. And instead they gave it to us. And I think if we run it, then they have to give the money back to California, but whatever, it's here. Now this guy, oh, just in full disclosure, I can't show you this today, but this is the inside of one of the Reading business cars. It's like the president's car. This is this locomotive. This was the last locomotive that the Reading got. They acquired this in 1975. At that point, the Reading was already in receivership. In 1976, they went into Conrail. The Reading ceased to exist. As part of the Conrail deal, this locomotive went to the Delaware and Hudson. And there was another deal, and I'm not sure exactly how, but it wound up with CSX, and they gave it to us. Here you see it in the CSX format. You know, it's fully operational. And I just find this thing intriguing. You have any idea what that is? What this has is it has like a graphite stick, and it's spring-loaded, and it just pushes that stick against the flange of the wheel, and it like coats that. That rubs against the rail. You know, the graphite comes off there on the rail, and it really reduces the wear on the rail to the point where it's, you know, if you scrape that with your fingernail, you can come off.
Oh yeah, it's like lead on benzene.
Yeah, it's exactly. And I'm surprised that it gets enough graphite on the locomotive wheel to take care of the whole train, but obviously it's worth doing because they do it. I'd never seen that before we got this locomotive. This is kind of my favorite piece. That's a builder's photograph of that tender. You know, that's from 1905. It's like 116 years old. Reason that exists, one of those epic sweeps of history. You know, today, you know, you have oil refineries in Philadelphia, and Wilmington, Jersey City. Back in the day, they were primary oil producers. All that oil came from Texas, Louisiana, went by ship across the Gulf of Mexico and up the East Coast. Well, German U-boats started sinking the tanker ships, so all that oil switched to the railroads. The railroads carrying all kinds of munitions, government decided that your wreck train had to have firefighting capability. Fight fire, you needed water, but all the tank cars are already carrying oil. So you look around, they got this old steam tender, you know, 2/3 of that carries water anyway. And what they did is they sealed off the end where the coal went and sealed it up, and they made it into basically a rectangular tank. See from here, you know, everything from here on out was that. You know, if this were hooked up to a tender, everything from here on out would be here. And you can see how that beading goes in, and that goes back, you know, maybe 10 feet, and that's where the coal went. And everything in there would be, you know, so that carries water. You know, when the war got going and they were scrapping the old steam engines, that was part of the wreck train, so it survived. By the time they got around to scrapping the wreck train, it was collectible. A guy picked it up and gave it to us. This shows it at the Rutherford Yard as part of the wreck train. The box car has like pumps, and it has foam generation equipment and like that. And while we're talking about wreck trains, you can see our wrecking crane. You know, that's 125 ton capacity diesel. It's parked down there because this is our temporary entrance, and the cranes are really unstable. They're top heavy, you know, everything moves. So we didn't trust it coming up here. Similarly, the silver cars are RDC cars. If that tried to come up here, its pilot would run into the rail. It couldn't clear the rail here. So we have a number of cabooses. This is our oldest one. We're going inside in a moment. It's 1935. This was the last caboose that the Reading actually assembled themselves. Now, if you're in the trucks, there's trucks on the caboose, and there's total trucks, which is probably down on the third floor with the renovated infrastructure. They were the only people that used these kinds of trucks.
Steering wheel.
Here we are. You see sometimes we get a general mode, sometimes not so gentle. You know, this fatality.
Yeah.
Different episode. Oh, you guys aren't local, so this is genuine anthracite. Okay, you look at it and, you know, you can see it's shiny. You know, graphite is, this is almost 100% pure carbon. It's a very, very high purity coal, which means it burns slow and hot and whatever. And actually, anthracite, its peak production year was 1917. Okay, and it tapered way off. The whole area up here was in depression for a generation. But in later years, you know, I mean, the last few years, the anthracite production has actually been going up. Part of that was the embargo on Russian gas, so they're burning some of this in Europe. But there used to be a restroom in that corner. This caboose doesn't have one. It was a little more in a hole in the floor. We don't know the story on that. Most cabooses have grab irons over here because you really get jerked around at the end of the train. This doesn't have that. It has unique, well, you don't care. You know,
It keeps the assault shotgun.
yeah, you can see here the secret thing. You know, the secret shop. Railroads run on animal crackers.
I see that. Foreman Bailey's tell.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to food, you know, I mean, the guys ate in here, and you know, you had a good stove, and some of the guys, you know, would really get into cooking, and of course, some of the guys were like bologna sandwiches. And this thing, you know, it's hard in a day like today to think what it would be like. You're up on a mountaintop at a colliery and switching cars in late December, and you know, you come in and this thing is pumped up and going cherry red, and it just feels so good. And I mean, they would really get it pumped up to where they had to put this up because they would keep cracking the glass and charring the wood. Has an office for the conductor, you know, he's got the paperwork for the things. You know, you can see a coal oil lamp that's been converted to electric. And you can also see a, you know, a boundary for when it was coal oil to keep the stuff off of it. You know, the iconic part of the caboose is the cupola. You know, whenever the train is moving, the guys sit up there and keep an eye on things. And they're looking for anything out of the ordinary, but what they're looking for mostly is what's called a hot box. You know,
Go ahead, steer it.
I got that.
Keep pushing it.
you like each other. Come on.
Don't.
Yeah, that's there. Now, there's a good one. Yeah. I don't know if I got those.
Oh, you just gotta keep snapping it. It'll be interesting.
Bad.
Okay, there ought to be one in the. Yeah. You're addicted to it.
Yeah, exactly.
I ran from Philadelphia to the top of Broad Mountain. In the mid-50s, late 50s, they abandoned it. This came to us from Norfolk Southern. I have a picture of her big hammer.
No.
And, you know, it's switching, you know, 100-car coal trains in a yard. So this used to be a Fairbanks Morse trainmaster. The trainmaster was the highest horsepower first generation diesel. The Reading had a number of them. This is not ex-Reading. It's one of like only two that survived. Fairbanks Morse made diesel engines for American submarines during World War II. At the end of the war, they figured that's going to be a dying market, so they brought out a line of locomotives. And, you know, they had a very full line of locomotives, and pretty successful. I said this was the highest horsepower first generation. They never went to second generation, so I never had a problem. So this little guy at the end is a complete locomotive, shop locomotive. You know, if you're working on an engine and you have to move it, you know, any locomotive that's hanging around, you can move it. But back in the day, you wanted it to be as short as possible. This is an old, it's called a blunt truck. It's off a, you know, a really old diesel switcher. It's battery powered. The batteries can't drive the traction motor directly, so you have a motor generator set that gives you voltage and current that is compatible with the traction motors. You can see all the electrical gear here. Basically, this is an MU car, local unit. You know, what they do is they have electric traction motors on the front truck. You can see the pantograph is down on this, but that would stick up and rub on an overhead wire, take 11,000 volts. You know, if you have regular passenger cars, you have a locomotive, and you know, during the night you may need one passenger car, during the day you may need, rush hour, you may need 15, 20 car trains. So you'd have to change locomotives and keep balancing the engines against the train. You know, since each train has, or each car has its own motors, it doesn't matter, you put as many as you need in there, what it does. What the Reading did that's interesting is this bus bar thing on the roof. You know, you push that bumper out, it bumps up against the next car, and that electrically connects all the cars in the train. And the idea is, you know, only the first car and the last car have their pantographs on. So, you know, if you have 14 cars, it reduces the wear on the overhead line by, you know, a factor 12, you know. So it's, you know, really worth doing. Pretty, see how sad it looks. Now the green car there, you look at that, you can see the old lettering, Grand Trunk Western, was owned by the Canadians. And they did things a little differently. There's a drum mounted on the axle, and that belt thing will drive that generator whenever the car is moving. There used to be this locomotive, if you stand up there, it looks twice as big as when you're standing. Haven't figured that one out. The most dramatic shot is from down here, looking up at these way down there, you're looking up at it. Last one in, shut the door.
Oh, wow.
Hi. Woo!
Okay, yeah, look at the pictures to get an idea of, you know, the intensity of what we're looking at. You know, this is the tower that this was in. And the little thing there in the middle of this, you know, this is what the tower controls. So, you know, you have about this much on the other side as well. And this was the, you know, the train station and the convention center. So you have...
Train 831 on distance approach.
Now,
Okay.
what's happening here, you see that white light on Westwood 3?
831, terminal 85.
Okay, a train has just arrived at this area. He's announcing that, and I didn't hear it, but he's telling them where it's going. Okay, now you see that light just changed to orange, and it's probably going to move. And they changed another one there, and you know he's going to run him. I don't know where he's going, but the white lights are the trains. Okay, so he'll move around somewhere there. Okay, he just passed that signal. It turned to red, and you see him there coming here. The two top tracks have trains parked in them temporarily. This is where the station is. You can hear the train now going past you. If you listen closely at some of the things, you can hear the guys in here changing these things. And you go in there, and there's stuff in there like you wouldn't believe.
Definitely.
Now, these were all connected every which way, and when you turn one of these, you know, you change everything. Like one of these grips, you know, two guys can barely lift this thing. When we put it in here, it went through the floor, so you'll notice that spot we had to put concrete piers in to support it. Watch your hands.
Been approved from terminal to 2 east is from
On here, there's various numbers on here that correspond with up there.
Okay.
I think the upper ones control signals and the bottom ones control turnouts or vice versa, and I don't know how it works, but you get some idea of the
This is
solidity
right
of
here.
this thing.
Bring me ham and cheese.
Yeah,
Alright.
and these may be signals, but, you know, on some of these you can see a number, like 15. Okay, there you can see the number 15. Okay, so that's, 15 is the number of a turnout, and you would throw that switch to go whichever way you're doing. And I can see where that guy went. If you're at the end, you could probably say, I think it went to track 8.
train number 306, the car form.
You notice it even handles a submarine.
We'd like to report that after leaving Bethlehem Engine Terminal, we lost one motor on engine 9164. We attempted to restart several times, but no success.
Roger, I'll come down with the mechanic and I'll meet you at Palmer.
Right, thank you.
The bumper.
I don't know where he got this from, but it's obviously, you know, a day's work.
Registry train 466. Registry train 466, over. We have a look at it when you approach Hill Street Junction. Pick up the signal maintain.
Roger, pick up the signal maintain. Now,